So I wanted to provide a view into Australian class poetics, and by that I mean visions of class, perspectives on class, poetics of class, obviously, as lived, and quite often at the intersections. That is to say, class is not exclusively a white category, even if in nationalistic tones, kind of mythifying tones, that's what people think of or invoke. So I reject the so-called class poetics of someone like Les Murray or those broader sort of masculinity and class poetics of some Australian poets. Um, I'm interested in the poetry of Evelyn Araluen and others who look at indigeneity, class, and dispossession as well. There are a couple of other poets as well. In Victoria in the 90s, Pi O was very active, so migrant class poetics. There was this guy called Jeff Goodfellow, but again, there's limitations even therein. It was very difficult to publish anything as someone who's queer and of migrant slash diasporic heritage that had the imprint of working class realities in it in the 90s. We just supposedly didn't exist, right? Or have a voice. But there's a number of poems where, yes, even from a queer perspective, even masculinity and class are tackled in Stone Bitter Stories. It's undeniable. It's undeniable how the class voice comes through, and I think that was part of the problem of trying to get this work published in those decades, because not only was it unintelligible to middle class poetics, which actually still reigns supreme in Australia, but also my sources in thinking about the intersections that I named before were not necessarily available in Australia. I would say maybe reading the work of Lisa Belia was inspiring to me. A friend of mine mentioned the very controversial Majuru, and the way in which institutionalized and violent forms of class and racial relations and dispossession are mapped out in their work. But that is in the novel, and that's not in poetry. So it's a real oversight, and there's a tendency to think that if working class, diasporic, migrant, racialized subjects write in poetry about these things, that somehow we might tend towards some kind of victimhood narrative or misery memoir. That's not the intention. In the work that I developed in the 90s, that doesn't mean glorifying class, working class hero and all that kind of stuff. Not at all. So, if I were to choose some poems that spoke to this, especially masculinity and class, in the figure of my father, I would enjoin My Father Sings Along to Johnny Cash, which is coming out in Meniscus Literary Review next month. So yes, it turns out that it can be published in the 2020s. As time is now, maybe. I was really surprised because I felt like it might be out of date. I did actually publish some poems from that period, but they weren't those with real class perspectives. They didn't get a very good reception, let's say. There's a really cutting poem that's called Where I Come From. And it's pretty unadorned. There's also Greatest Hits, which I'm not sure if I've included in the final analysis in this collection. But, people from postcodes that are stigmatized If we talk about Western Sydney here, we talk about Blacktown and Liverpool and Mount Druitt and I don't know, Cabramatta, Campbelltown, amongst others. They're foreseeably right, but do they write with this subjectivity? Are they allowed to? Are they received on those terms? Does the Australian literary establishment get it? When we're queer, does it still not get it? When we're migrant heritage, does it still not get it? It's bizarre. There's always been so much gatekeeping. Clearly it is the domain of the bourgeoisie, right? Especially in poetry. At least the publishing aspect. I'm trying to find some examples where I come from. You know, is this a question of aesthetics? Or is it a question of not wanting to read, hear, listen? That much has never been completely clear to me. And especially being a person of sex worker experience. So for me, working class existence at this cross-section that I've been speaking about, it's not about necessarily property ownership. It's not about stability or a cultural cohesiveness around being working class. It's about fragmentation. It's about interpersonal and family violence. This, to some biased readers, may come across as misery memoir. But many working class individuals, also those who are racialized or queer, they bear it on their skin. I think at the time, one of my real reference for thinking about class was Dorothy Allison, the novelist. But there were also poets that talked about, you know, constantly being on the move, working in survival economies, policing and that kind of stuff. Mainly from the US though. Australia hasn't necessarily, maybe we have an exception over the last kind of little while, in mags like Overland, hasn't really provided space for these sorts of perspectives. Anyway, I will read the unadorned poem. It's called Where I Come From. It was written in the 90s. So you have to imagine that I'm in my 20s. I'm probably a decade out of living in Westfield, now known as Camillo, in what's the Armidale-Kelmscott district. So to use ABS data, the safe index is kind of between 830 and 865 for those areas. And, you know, Armidale gets labelled Armour Hole because of that. Where I come from. 1. The men drive fast cars, load up on emu export, terrorise the neighbourhood all their youth. The women threaten to leave, push to desperate acts. A rage rarely shown in public but hoarded like gold coins. 2. If you want to let loose, you've got to do it somewhere else. There's no cinemas or classy restaurants for miles. Shopping the adventure. Bank balances run dry as artesian water. 3. I've called this the dead heart, the dormitory life of suburbia, where families come and go from sunup to end of work. There are other momentums, hardly accidental. Alliances are bought and sold. Sons become their fathers, their anger barely subdued, whether they break into shops, hit their girlfriends, take speed or kill the video. 4. Lives are tenuous. Sometimes threats are followed up in a fantasy of violence, one boy's uncontrollable fury and regret. 5. I didn't stay. No, I was driven out. Swore I'd never go back. The walls of every house wear the inevitable battle scars, like generational grudges. So no, I didn't go back. Except there is a poem of going back, and I'll see if I can find that. I don't think it's actually in this collection. It's called Greatest Hits. Bear with me. I've got to look it up on the screen. Sad but true. Greatest hits. Where are you? Greatest hits. My eyes aren't so great right now, so yeah. Brother poems, that's what I've called them. Oh, okay. Okay, so since when I look away from the screen it tends to slow down, I'm going to try to do a side by side, at least for my reading. Greatest hits. LL Cool J couldn't top this. The music pumping between hits isn't hip-hop this time, but Megadeth, the sound of frustrated youth. He won't talk, though this is my first visit in 5 years. We're both old. I ask for a cigarette. He jokes at how I've changed. Typical Lewis, he says, turning up unannounced, dismissive, but there's a hint of respect. I tell Mum to back off. Let the boy have his bong in peace. He's an adult now. Though I'm lying. He couldn't cook a meal. Operate a washing machine. Mum does that for him. Worries when the police come or he comes home drunk. I'm there for under an hour. I've seen enough. He's all armour. Years later, that'll drop. Felony charges, rehab, forced by law or parents, his twin woes. No job, no girlfriend. Nearly been to prison twice. In his room, short on dough, he sniffs paint with friends, still young at heart. The room acrid with cum odours. Late night pornos slip behind the bed, where he sleeps like a dead man into the afternoon. Public Enemy, drifting, their choppy rhythms like headlights, the greatest hits of his life. And there are other poems as well. The father poems, the brother poems, definitely track them. Those contours of class is what I mean. And I actually had a good look at the collection to think about its sort of class politics. But I might actually just put something about that below. So I hope you enjoyed a little brief peek into this. It's by no means exhaustive. But that's what I was trying to do in the 90s, right this way. It was still very fresh for me.